Topic here is 1950s and 60s music. So for the most part, I want to try to get an understanding of why the devil's music was a label given to rock and roll, how the music sound from those 2 decades, and if there's anything relatable to today. Keep in mind, all of this information is from the 50s and 60s, which is where our presentations come from, because the presentations seem to address many issues from the 50s, the 60s, civil rights movement, Vietnam, Cold War, and so on. So you're going to see throughout this screencast images like this, where this is really just looking at the song sheet that you were asked to look at in class. And then for the most part, we just want to look at some of the images. So this is an image of the Barbershop Quartet, which is a reference to what becomes known as the doo-wop sound. So I don't really have any doo-wop sounds in the lyric packet. But what you can do is take a listen to some of these songs. So you do have the titles, the name of the song, the name of the artist, and that doo-wop sound has a sound where it's a group of males usually singing in harmony. Maybe you have somebody with a high-pitched voice, somebody with that low-pitched baritone voice, and they just kind of sing with harmony. And take a listen to those songs. I'll give you some examples later on. For the most part, we're going to transition. So the 1950s, I'm going to be going quick here. 1950s, some of the things you might want to do as you're listening to some of those songs would be to hang out at the diner. Keep in mind this is a drive-in, as it tells you right here. Some of the slang from the 1950s. Agitate the gravel to leave. They're talking about a hot rod. What is a hot rod? A hot rod is a reference to those cars. This is an image from the film American Graffiti. We've already talked about the car customization, the golden age of cars. And so this would give you an example of what a hot rod would look like. In the 1950s, we have the birth and boom of the suburbs really starting to heat up with that baby boom. And one of the places to hang out could be the local eatery. This could also be the eatery at the drive-in. What is a drive-in? A drive-in is a place where you could watch a movie. And here's an aerial shot of the drive-in, primarily found in the suburbs. And so with the drive-in, what's going on here is you park your vehicle. This pole has a speaker. The speaker is attached to a wire. The speaker goes into the car, and then you can hear the sound from the television. And maybe you then have an eatery back here, and that could be the eatery that I showed before. Cruising, hanging out at the local, in this case, A&W. And we know that this individual has customized his car because he is so interested in showing it off, because he has decided to leave the hood off to show you how he was customized his vehicle. And this guy just seems to be way too interested in this. Like, this guy right here does not care at all. This guy really doesn't care. Anyway, let's move on. Some more images from the hangout at the local shop. Hamburgers, ice cream, chicken baskets, barbecue. If you're not going to eat the TV dinner, was one of the items we talked about. Here we see an image of the nuclear family, and when I use the term nuclear family, I'm not trying to upset anybody. That is a reference to the house in the 1950s, 1960s, with that white picket fence that everybody talks about, with that American dream. And then you have a situation in the 50s where you have the male, who is the patriarch of the family, and the female. You can have 2 children. Both of those children, dad possibly can purchase his vehicle to go to work. He can also afford to pay for his wife's vehicle. And I'm going to draw a little station wagon here. And this is the nuclear family. I did try to change the colors. I don't know why they didn't, but I was trying to make that blue, but I guess that didn't work. Anyway, so this image here, the 1950s of the nuclear family, this golden age, does not exist for everybody. So when we look at the 1950s, the 50s is associated with this happy time. However, that happy time is not experienced by all. In the 1960s, we have African Americans challenging segregation. We're going to see gay Americans. We're going to see women, Chicano Americans, and others that are going to protest in the 1960s. And then by the time we get to the 70s, it's going to be this transition period to see how many of those changes are actually going to become reality. But for the most part in this image, we see the traditional nuclear family of the 1950s hanging out. Sorry to use the word traditional. I'm not trying to upset anybody. But that is definitely a phrase from the 1950s. Anything that's not traditional is going to be viewed as an outcast for this time period. We already talked about the day the music died, some of the icons. I want to point out that there was a war in the 1950s between France and Vietnam. And in 1950s, that is the Brown versus Board of Ed decision trying to challenge segregation and integrate the schools. We have the beating of Emmett Till, a teenager who was beaten for whistling at a white woman. And gay Americans would probably be exposed, or actually boys in general would be exposed to the PSA Boys Beware that was played at schools. We watched some of this in class where Ralph was trying to coerce the boy into a homosexual relationship. And that was designed to make, I guess, students struggling with their sexual identity to make them really think twice about those choices, because at that point, homosexuality was viewed as a choice. Some of the dances maybe you want to get involved with, the Lindy Hop, the Jerk, the Twist, feel free to click the links and watch them. Maybe you want to dance to the song Breaking Up is Hard to Do, the Kennedy assassination in 1963. And we talked about in the presentations the difference between the new left and the old left. The new left of the 1960s is dealing with African Americans, they're dealing with gay Americans, Chicano Americans, women. They're dealing with Native Americans. I don't know why those images aren't there. But when we look at the 1960s, we want to use 1965 as the dividing line, and the early 1960s. Not that they're associated with happiness, but they definitely are a time period where things are just kind of there. But by the time we get to the late 60s, that tail of two 60s, Americans are starting to get really angry about the situation. Why? Because the Tet Offensive, the My Lai Massacre, Robert Kennedy's assassinated, John F. Kennedy is assassinated in the early 60s, but his brother Robert Kennedy is assassinated in the late 60s, in 68 as well, and so was King. So definitely have that tale of two 60s playing out, some of the slang. Back to the early 60s, Nina Simone, her song Mississippi Goddamn, which was written in response to the Medgar Evers assassination. We also have the Malcolm X assassination. Sam Cooke, who was criticized by Malcolm X. The two of them were friends. Malcolm felt that Sam Cooke could do a little bit more on race relations, and he winds up writing the song A Change Is Gonna Come, and then Malcolm X is assassinated. We have the suburbs with the malls starting to develop, and maybe you want to listen to the song These Eyes or A Little Bit of Soul, which really isn't about anything in comparison to Sam Cooke's Change Is Gonna Come or Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn. I mean, when we look at the lyrics to this particular song, he's saying, it's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die because I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. And here you have a song that's simply just talking about don't take your love away from me, don't leave my heart in misery. So here they're just concerned about the relationship, and here they're simply concerned about living. So definitely a difference with regard to those songs there. We've already talked a little bit about the car customization. Maybe that's something you want to do so you could go out cruising. However, keep in mind in Birmingham, dogs are attacking teenagers who are protesting in Birmingham. By the time we get to the late 60s, we would see the anti-war movement really start to pick up in response to events like the Tet Offensive. But you could also just kind of blend in within society. And if you're a female, maybe you just want to, be the housewife, and you really don't have to worry too much about these events unless you have a child, and then you run the risk of that individual being drafted. Here we have some dances again. Mamas and the Papas, California Dreaming. So with this particular song here, we know that there is a war in Vietnam. We know that Americans have been sent to go fight in Vietnam over here. And if you were a soldier in Vietnam, maybe this was one of the songs that you would listen to. I'd be safe and warm if I was in LA. If I was in LA, California Dreaming on such a winter's day. So not really a song about the Vietnam War, but a song that was embraced by soldiers. And if you were not fighting in the Vietnam War, maybe you're a homosexual struggling, trying to figure out who you are, and maybe find yourself at a Tescadero, which was a facility and where they would perform experiments on homosexuals, shock therapy to try to make them not homosexuals. Keep in mind, this was a place that was reserved for sexual deviants, people accused of committing some sort of crime. We'll also want to point out that this was also significant for Muslims on a global scale. In particular, this individual, Saeed Qutb, who was an Egyptian, wrote a book called Milestones. He apparently traveled to the United States, and when he made it to the United States, he was really concerned about Americans being too materialistic and individualistic, not really concerned about, any sort of community. And he felt that divorce was too common and the sexuality in America was just a little too much. He would go on later to write something called Milestones, his work, and he definitely criticized the United States, capitalism, communism. The reason why I bring him up is because he finds himself where he's looking at trying to keep these influences out of states that have a high Muslim population. And he would go on to influence somebody by the name of Abdullah Azzam, who would then go on to influence Osama bin Laden, who would take their own interpretation of the Quran and create, a different ideology for Muslims to follow. The only reason why I bring this up is we cannot look at an event like 9/11 without understanding Saeed Qutb and his travel to the United States. Let's see. This is an image of Route 66. So maybe if you wanted to travel on this particular road, if you are African American, maybe you don't want to stop at Amarillo because maybe you go there and you're going to be harassed, called a name, called a couple names, beaten up, whatever. So maybe you want to use the Green Book. What's the Green Book? It was a guide that would let you know as an African American what places at Amarillo, like restaurants, hotels, you would be able to stay at where you would avoid such harassment. Because the last thing you would want to do is walk into this particular establishment and feel like the outcast. Why? Because we're still dealing with the backlash, the end result of segregation. We know that there's a protest in Birmingham. We know that the anti-war movement is heating up. And we know that big girls apparently don't cry. How do we know that? Well, we know that because Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons told us so in this song, Big Girls Don't Cry. We Gotta Get Out of This Place by The Animals was another song that was embraced by U.S. soldiers fighting in Vietnam. Notice the year 1965. Really, it's just kind of self-explanatory. We got to get out of this place. Not a song about Vietnam, but a song that soldiers embrace. Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, if you've listened to some of their songs already, I know they're on the list. That is a perfect example of that doo-wop sound. All of the group members singing in harmony. We still have that new left that's really starting to gain more groups, more followers. Why? Because of events like the My Lai Massacre. We also have, once again, the stereotypical housewife for the 1950s, gay Americans struggling with their issues, and Saeed Qutb really critiquing United States society. By the time we get to the late 60s, we have the anti-war movement. Again, getting upset. Why? Because of events like the Tet Offensive, Napalm Girl. And if you're in the United States and you're a female, maybe you want to go to Atlantic City and protest the Miss America beauty pageant, which is precisely what is going on here. And if you're Frank Kameni, maybe you want to protest and argue gay is good because society is arguing in Boys Beware that homosexuality and being gay is not good. So he's challenging that argument. Chicano Americans are starting to protest, seeking a change in education where bilingual education is something that becomes required. So they're starting to challenge. And, while that's going on, maybe you're just sitting there really not giving a damn about any of it. And you're just listening to Sherry. Sherry, can you come out tonight? Come out tonight. Come out tonight. Yeah, I don't even know. I don't know how to do that. Sherry baby. Fade Sherry. Sherry baby. Maybe you want to hang out looking for Sherry. Maybe you want to do the dance to Jitterbug. Hang out once again. Go to the drive-in. And if you're Lyndon Johnson, you're really dealing with all of these issues. Here you see an image of Lyndon Johnson. Really looks at a loss here. Dealing with the civil rights movement. Probably dealing with the Vietnam War. and really can't resolve some of these issues as things really start to heat up. The Watts riots takes place in 1965. I want to say it's over Marquette Fry getting pulled over, which leads to police getting upset, or the black population and Watts getting upset at the police. The anti-war movement really starting to heat up, as I mentioned before. And if you don't care about any of these things, you could just simply listen to Dedicated to the One I Love by the Shirelles. And none of this applies then. Like, what do you care? All you're concerned about is your own individualistic agenda, which I think is what Saeed Cutup was claiming. Just all these images just repeat. Malcolm X assassination, Medgar Evers, King, Robert Kennedy, Get Me Out of Here, Napalm Girl. By the time we get to the late 60s, Lyndon Johnson would drop out of the race. We would transition into the 70s, where the gay rights movement really starts to pick up after Stonewall. The Weathered Underground protesting the Vietnam War and racial injustice. 1970s transition period. In this protest in Boston, it's about busing black students into white schools, and the problems that people feel could occur as a result of that. Women are going to be able to choose whether or not they can get an abortion. We have the Kent State Massacre. The United States is going to leave Vietnam at a point when terrorism on a global scale is going to heat up. And maybe none of that stuff applies. Nobody cares. Maybe Lyndon Johnson needed to do a better job. However, he's probably in a bind. Anyway, that's it.